All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Integrate Professional Development webinar series. The Integrate project aims to promote faculty teaching about the Earth in the context of society. Integrate is an NSF-funded STEM talent expansion project, and its two overarching goals are first, to develop materials and curricula that are adoptable and adaptable for faculty to increase Earth literacy for all undergraduates, and second, to increase majors in the geosciences and related fields to develop a workforce capable of tackling environmental and resource challenges. This webinar is part of a series supporting teaching with Integrate principles, using a piloted and peer-reviewed Integrate developed and curated materials as tools. On the screen and in the chat box, there is a link to the webinar event page where you can find the presentation slides for today's webinar, resources related to the presentation, and afterwards, a recording of the webinar. If you have questions along the way, you can type them into the chat box. To access that, find the Zoom control bar and click on chat. We ask that you leave your audio muted and video off, as this will help us get a good recording of the webinar. I'm happy to introduce today's speaker, Dave Moak, who will be presenting on departmental climate and geoethics. The webinar will discuss the nature of personal interactions and how they impact individuals in academic departments. This includes principles of professionalism and examples of professional and unprofessional behaviors that impact the climate of a department. Suggestions will be made on ways to assess your department work climate, and concrete examples will be provided on how to prevent threatening situations should they arise. And with that introduction, I will turn things over to Dave.
Okay, thanks, Mitch. First of all, I'd like to thank the Integrate Project for hosting this webinar and to NAGT for supporting the development of the resources that I'm going to present. I'd like to thank everybody out there in the world who's watching. Thanks for taking time out of your busy days. And let's especially give a thank to NSF for their long-term support of these types of education initiatives. Okay. There we go. I'm sorry. There we go. So today, as Mitch said, I'd like to make this presentation in three parts, really. The first part is to introduce some of the principles of professionalism. And these are concepts that are around us like the ether, but we don't often engage them directly or think about them as we do our work as physical scientists. I want to look at some issues and behaviors, both positive and negative, that ultimately impact department climate. I do have to do a little bit of a detour and take head on some of the current issues of sexual harassment and bullying that have been in the news. And on the way out, I hope that we will send you home with some thoughts on things that you can do to build a safe, welcoming, and inclusive department. I'd like to emphasize that this is the start of a project, the start of a process, excuse me. And the first part is simply to be aware of the behaviors that can impact life in your work situation. I'd like you to also to reflect as educators, where and by whom are these professional standards going to be taught in your curriculum? And again, I would like you all to leave this workshop thinking about things that you can do personally and as a department that can ensure that everyone has a safe, inclusive, and welcoming environment for all people. A lot of the resources that I'll be talking about are more fully developed on my teaching geoethics across the geoscience curriculum, and particularly on the link to the pages on professionalism. So any follow-up work that you want to do, there's many more resources on this website. I'd also like to direct you to the Online Ethics Center for Engineering and Science. This has recently been taken over by the National Academy, and there are also extensive resources on responsible conduct of research and responsible conduct of scientists on this site as well. Well, we might ask, why would we teach ethics? And there's a number of reasons in our professional development of students. The first is simply that we have to do a better job in attracting and supporting this success of a diverse workforce. And in too many cases, an uncivil environment is a real turnoff for many students that may be from underrepresented groups, perhaps based on gender and for other reasons. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to really work towards this climate that is indeed welcoming, inclusive, and safe. Increasingly, the funding agencies, NSF and NIH, are requiring training of students in the responsible conduct of research. Employers are increasingly expecting that their workers come to the job having basic training in ethics. They simply can't be exposed to liabilities for irresponsible behaviors. And the public demands the highest standards of ethical conduct by our scientists. So there's many, many reasons why we collectively need to think about teaching ethics. And what I'd like to do is to start off with a brief review of some of the underlying foundations of professional behaviors. And this has to do with the concepts of power, trust, respect, and responsibility. A few principles of professionalism, starting off with power. In any social structure, there is necessarily an asymmetry of power. And in many cases, this asymmetry can lead to unethical behaviors, behaviors that influence or control the behaviors of others. And in many cases, power, how it's adjudicated, can either be enabling or disabling. And here's a couple of different aspects of power that you may recognize. This is from French and Raven and their kind of landmark study in the nature of the basis of social power. In some cases, we have the power to reward, and this is positive. This is the carrot. And in other cases, power can be used coercively or in a punitive way. For example, restricting access to resources or opportunities. There's the concept of legitimate power, and this is in usually an organizational structure where power is bestowed, for example, to a department head or a dean. We also talk about referent power, and that is association with others with power. You might recognize this perhaps as seats of power in a department. It could be a certain faction of the department. It could be the old white guys like me. But in any case, just mere association with the power structure may be present. We may have expert power, and that's based on expertise or proven abilities. And there is also power with respect to information, the ability to control information as needed by others in ways that this may impact their performance. I'd like you also to think about the concept of using power over people to coerce certain behaviors or work expectations, as opposed to power with, meaning we're using the power to work with people to enhance and enable their productivity. Trust is a second major foundation I think we need to think about. And so what is trust? Well, David Resnick defines it as relationships between or among people. It facilitates cooperative social interactions, for example, in business, among family relations, among colleagues, where there's a shared expectations of behavior. Trust has a certain aspect of risk-taking. Entering a trusting relationship means that you have the expectation that your colleagues are going to use their skills and sound judgment for the benefit of all. Individuals are judged to be trustworthy, competent, exercising goodwill. And in many cases, trust also generates ethical and legal obligations to do what is right in what is expected. Oh, I thought I got those out of there. The National Academy of Sciences has a wonderful book called On Being a Scientist. And I really highly recommend this to everyone. Share it with your students. But they say, I'm going to have to try to get rid of those boxes. Sorry. Scientific enterprise is built on a foundation of trust. Society trusts that scientific research results in an honest and accurate reflection of a researcher's work, and researchers equally trust that their colleagues have gathered data carefully, have used appropriate analytic and statistical techniques, have reported the results accurately, and have treated the work of other researchers with respect. And I would just offer that if we don't have a trusting relationship among colleagues and students in our department, violations of this trust can lead to many, many interpersonal conflicts. And so we see this in many dimensions. I'll just go through a few of these. Certainly in the responsible conduct of research, we have to believe that the work of our colleagues and students is trustworthy and accurate. Mentoring is more than advising. It's actually entering a trusting relationship with students or mentees in such a way that you advocate and create opportunities for those who we are mentoring. There's a certain amount of trust in asking for and writing letters of recommendation, that this is going to be done truthfully and in a timely manner. Right. And it extends to writing reviews of journal articles, proposals, and if you're an administrator, performance reviews. There's trust in all manner of collaborations. We trust that we work in a safe lab or field setting. We trust that when we go to meetings, people will behave appropriately, that we avoid conflicts of interest, or at least that we identify those conflicts of interest. And as we work for society, there are many, many trusting relationships with us as expert, where we might be a contractor to a client or advisor for public policy, or serving as an expert witness. A third aspect of professionalism is responsibility. AAAS did a survey in 2015, and the results of this survey showed that in the 21st century, AAAS has affirmed that we should be doing our science and using our technology to address tomorrow's needs and aspirations and work towards sustainability. That's one of the major goals of Integrate: improving human health, addressing economic disparities, understanding our place in the universe, promoting peace and security, and directing products and technology towards the betterment of society. In the poll, it turned out that most of our peers placed a very high value on taking steps to minimize anticipated risks associated with our work, reporting suspected misconduct, explaining our work to the public, and so on. So these are all responsibilities that we assume when we enter the profession as scientists. I won't belabor this. Many people have spent a lot of time thinking about responsible conduct of research, and usually when you take a science ethics course, this is the focus of much of that presentation. But we certainly care about treatment of data and data management, falsification, research misconduct, laboratory safety, any number of authorship, editing, and peer reviewing responsibilities, and so on. And I would just say that when any of these facets of responsible conduct of research are breached, it's like a cancer, and it's the type of thing that can just work its way through a lab, through a department, even an institution. And this is just one area where we have to be alert that we are all acting responsibly, and that we are also in some ways self-policing to make sure that we set those high standards. GSA, in their code of conduct, has clearly articulated responsibilities of geoscientists. And if you go to their code of conduct, you will see that they articulate responsibilities to science and the profession, to students and colleagues, employers and employees, clients and end users, to the public and humanity, and ultimately for the stewardship of our environment and natural resources. And I guess the question I would ask this audience, because I know most of you are educators, where in your curriculum do your students encounter the GSA Code of Conduct, or a couple of the others that I'll show in just a minute? They really should know what the expectations are, what the standards are as they enter our profession. If we look at the AGI guidelines for ethical professional conduct, I'll just break this down into two components. This first page is in day-to-day activities, a geoscientist should be honest and act responsibility with integrity and so on. And I just want to point out that this set of guidelines that we're looking at here are personal responsibilities to the larger community, to the scientific community and the community at large. There is a parallel set of responsibilities as a member of a professional and scientific community. Geoscientists should do the following: promote greater understanding of the geosciences, sample responsibility, document and archive data, and so on. So I just want to emphasize that there are both personal and professional responsibilities that we recognize. And finally, the AGU scientific integrity principles. I'll just read the attributes in yellow: integrity and honesty, accountability, courtesy and fairness, cooperation, stewardship, legal compliance, and a humane approach. And the last thing is respect. Again, I won't belabor this particular point, but we really need to have respect for the people around us. We have to have respect for our profession. We have to respect the conduct of how we do our science and engineering. And in all of this, I would just offer that these are all lessons we should have learned in Sandbox 101. And if we had done so, perhaps we wouldn't have to have this type of webinar. So again, there are many foundations to how we behave in our work situations. Let me just emphasize again: power, responsibility, trust, and respect. And I would just ask you, where are these concepts introduced in your degree program? Where in the co-curriculum? It could be in the coffee room. It could be in a dedicated seminar. It could be in your day-to-day lab practice with your students. But these are a set of learned values and behaviors, and we have to model this every day. Who has the responsibility? It's easy to say that's not part of my class. Somebody else is going to do it. To what degree are you prepared to deal with issues of unprofessional behavior, should they arise in your class, in your lab, in your department, on a field trip, at a professional meeting? And can you recognize and then ultimately address these behaviors that can have a negative impact on your departmental climate? So let me just say, it's not always a clear case of right or wrong. Most of these ethical dilemmas have many shades of gray. And I think it's just important for us to recognize the danger signs and some of the behaviors as they emerge. So let's take a look at those now. First of all, there's a couple of basic principles that you may want to be aware of. The first is simply beneficence. And this is largely from the medical literature. It basically says, do no harm. But it can easily be applied to our work as physical scientists as well. And so some of the questions that surround this idea of beneficence when you're looking at an ethical dilemma are to ask some of the following questions. Who benefits? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the decision makers? Who has the power? Who's impacted? What are the risks? And there we have the decision maker in chief during Hurricane Katrina, and he probably should have asked some of these questions. We also have a model for ethical decision making, and I think that this is something that can be practiced early and often in many settings in our classrooms. You know, and this follows very closely with critical thinking in the classroom as well. It's very, very similar. As the ethical dilemma emerges, having a clear understanding of what the problem is, knowing something about the context and the facts around the situation, the ability to identify the relevant factors and who the stakeholders are, and to develop a list of options, and then to ultimately test those options against a series of tests. For example, the harm test. If I take this action, will there be harm? The publicity test. If I take this action, will it show up on the front page of the New York Times? Can I defend my actions to my peers or to the legal enforcement groups? Reversibility. If I take this action, is it irreversible, or is it something that I can go back and recover? Will my colleagues affirm that this is an appropriate action, and so on? Make a choice, think about the consequences, and then hopefully people will be empowered ultimately to be moral agents. So let me just quickly go through a couple of other behaviors that you should be aware of. There's extensive literature on this, and on my webpage, I've got many, many examples. But one thing that can really, really tear at a department are microaggressions. And microaggressions are the casual degradation of any marginalized group. And these are the day-to-day small cuts. And it leads to diminished self-confidence, contributes to poor self-image, and potentially leads to mental health, depression, even physical issues as well. The impacts are cumulative, they send a message of exclusion, and they hurt. And so I guess I would just implore you to look around every day and see if you can identify these microaggressions. These are a few that happen to be racial. This is from the University of Minnesota. But for example, underrepresented groups that are not served at a promotion booth, or who are not recognized in class. This sends out the message that they are second-class citizens and not welcome here. And there are many, many other examples of this. Implicit bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions that are activated involuntarily without an individual's awareness or intentional control. There are many, many types of implicit bias, but the halo effect, for example, gives an overall impression affected by other attributes. You know, a tall man enters into the room and he's viewed as being powerful or a leader. It may have nothing to do with that person's abilities, but it's attributed to him because of some other factor. Confirmation bias. This is what happens when I watch Rachel Maddow. I'm listening to information and making decisions made to confirm my pre-existing beliefs. Anchoring bias, again, relying on one trait that is a first impression that affects our ability to work with people in other contexts. Here's some examples of implicit bias. So for example, there's been many studies that show science faculty's subtle gender biases favor male students. You can sit back and count the number of times that either male or female students are called on to answer questions or take on tasks in the classroom. If you take a look at our professional societies, there is clearly an imbalance in the number of professional awards given by these societies. Marianne Holmes is written about this. Gender differences in recommendation letters. Well, Kuheli Dutt and others have written about this. The length of the letters is different, and the use of action verbs and strong affirmative confirmation of the abilities of males are far beyond what is written about females. And then finally, are Emily and Greg more employable than Lakeisha and Jamal? It's very clear that in blind reviews of applications that two identical resumes are read very differently. So just think about this as you are selecting, right now we're going through our grad applications. Think about this as we're looking at the type of department that we are trying to build as we try to include more and more people to our departments. There are ways to confront implicit bias and microaggressions. This is Stephanie Goodman's work, where she asks us to understand the context of the situation, assess the urgency of the problem, don't make it worse, determine who's being impacted and what can be done, what the alternatives are, what the consequences might be, and then again, make the decision to act. And this falls under the general field of empowering bystanders. Among other things, if you see one of these injustices happening, you can question, interrupt, or pivot. Did I just hear you say that? Can you repeat that? Or pivoting. Is that a rhinoceros over there? Redirecting to some other thing to defuse that situation. Remind people of their better selves. I know you better than that. Did you really say that? That doesn't sound like you. Are you having a bad day? Why would you say that? Challenge respectfully. I don't think that's true. I'm not comfortable with you making statements like that in my class, in my lab, in the field, wherever you are, or sometimes a physical response, exclamations, gestures, indications of surprise or worry or even horror. There's a great group out there called Hollaback. They have the 5 Ds for intervention strategies. And let me just say in red here, these are really major takeaway points for you. The first thing is there's no such thing as a neutral bystander. Everybody gets hurt when microaggressions and bias emerges. Silence is complicity, and there's always collateral damage. It is not just the perpetrator and the target of these types of activities. People around in the department, in your lab, are definitely going to be impacted. So the 5 Ds are simply direct action, step in, say or do something, distract, move the attention away. That's like Stephanie Goodman's pivot or interrupt. Delegate, get help from others, somebody in authority. Delay, as the event transpires, make sure that you offer support. Sit with the person, talk with them, have a follow-up, see if they need help in any sense, and ultimately document, because many of these actions do indeed require reporting and some kind of follow-up action. So videotaping, noting the time, the place, the actors, what events transpired, documenting that as clearly as possible is really important. And then finally, leading to bad behaviors, we really have a problem. Julie Labarkin has been documenting cases of sexual harassment in the academy. I checked her website yesterday, and right now there are 753 documented cases and counting of sexual violations in the academic setting. Many of these are very, very public. You've seen them in the news, and it's particularly acute in field settings. This is an article from The Atlantic talking about sexual assault and sexual harassment in the National Park Service and in the National Forests, but it really is endemic to the field sciences. Kate Clancy did a landmark study. She interviewed 666, maybe 644 people who had worked in field settings. She is an anthropologist, and this is just absolutely beyond belief. A majority of the survey respondents reported that they had directly observed or been told about inappropriate or sexual remarks at their most recent field site, 72%. And over 20% of the respondents reported that they had personally experienced sexual assault. This is just absolutely unacceptable, and we have got to get this out of our community. This is also from Clancy's work, this diagram. The survey sample is in the left. In the blue balls are male, and the red balls are female respondents. As you move from left to right across the diagram, the second column is the number of people that have experienced sexual harassment comments. The next column is the number of people that have experienced unwanted physical contact. The next column is being aware of how to report the contact, then the number of people that reported the contact, and the far right, the number of people that have been satisfied by the outcome of the reporting. Again, something has to give in the system so that these issues, first of all, are prevented, hopefully, but addressed in a meaningful way at the end. I'll pass this definition in the interest of time, but yeah, the real point here, it's not about attraction, sex, or romance, having fun, having a good time with colleagues, joking around. It really is about power. And this is why I wanted to start with our reflections of power. It's all about differential power. It's about power imbalance. It's about quid pro quo. It's the inability of the target to speak up and say no without fearing for repercussions from the more powerful perpetrator. And it's illegal. And so I really hope that you all know who your Title IX officer is or your affirmative action officer is on campus so that you can get the follow-up support that you need if you're ever in such a situation. And just a word about bullying. Bullying is also pervasive. It can be physical, it can be mental. It's aggressive and abusive behavior. It's not necessarily directed at legally protected groups based on race, gender, or religion, but it is often directed at individuals to make their life difficult. It again reflects an imbalance of power. Physical or psychological harm certainly is possible, and there is harm to the overall organization. So again, I hope that in your situation, you will recognize the power structures in your workplace, be aware of exploitation, whether it's staff or students, abuses of power, people who make excessive demands, support those that are affected, know the signs, and really act to prevent and mitigate these types of activities. I will just say that the impacts on targets, quite often students, is just absolutely horrific. It leads students to, in many cases, depart and leave the program. We can't afford to lose these brilliant young people from the ranks of our profession. They may have psychological disorders. They may have fear to enter the building or be in the presence of their abusers, fear of threat and retaliation. They have concerns about their ability to continue their research, get their degree, maintain their research assistantships, get letters of recommendation. And in my case, as department head, I had to reassign many students to alternate faculty advisors, which meant new supervisory committees, new thesis topics, new funding. And in some cases, restrictions on publication of the student work due to conflicts regarding intellectual property. So the students definitely get hurt. Other faculty get hurt because faculty who work in this environment typically have to pick up the slack. If perpetrators are suspended, the faculty that are remaining are going to have to teach extra classes, accept increased supervision of both undergraduate and graduate advising, helping students find new topics, and so on. So again, impacts on the department. You all realize that uncertainty is a great killer. The rumor mill starts running. Students see that classes are canceled or rescheduled. Students reassign new advisors, not always knowing exactly why. If you lose faculty because of bad behavior, quite often it's very difficult to get those lines back into the department. And although confidential, many of these events are often seen by students and they'll be posted on social media before you can blink your eye. So you really do want to avoid this from the start. I'm a soccer referee in part of my life, and let me just say that soccer is a metaphor for life. Let me just say that as you work in your department, know the rules. And as a leader, whether you're a department head or an instructor, position yourself to make the call. Be aware of what's going on in your work environment. Keep communication lines open, and practice what we all on the refereeing circuit call proactive officiating. Intervene early before people get into trouble. There's a reason why we show a yellow card in soccer that says, that's not going to happen on my field anymore. Let's show the yellow before we have to show the red and get somebody out of the game. Be decisive. Act to protect the safety of the players and integrity of the game. Act to protect the safety of those in your department and the integrity of your department. Realize that in dynamic situations, you have to be prepared to act immediately. I had campus security on speed dial. Because you never know what may ultimately transpire. But again, you have to be prepared to act. You have to know what the chain of communication is, what your responsibilities are. You need to know that ahead of time. Intent is irrelevant, even if people say, I didn't mean to hurt them or embarrass them or whatever. Intent is really irrelevant. Actions do have consequences. And we need to make people think about what they're doing and how they're interacting with people before they get into a bad situation. Okay, so the last part is reflecting on department climate. And climate is simply an organization's climate is reflected in its structures, its policies and practices, the demographics of its membership, the attitudes and values of its members and leaders, and the quality of the interpersonal interactions. And I would just ask you to reflect, how do you want your department to be viewed by students who are currently enrolled or perhaps prospective students, the administration, by your professional peers, and by the larger community? Is your department a place where people really want to come and work every day? Is that, and does your climate permit that? So here's some concerns about department climate that you might think of. And just going down the list: lack of respect, consideration, and or politeness to others, an insufficient sense of community or belonging. Perhaps there's different factions in the department, different subdisciplines that don't often see each other or perhaps even get along. Lack of recognition, visibility, and or value, and I'm speaking of individuals here. Ineffective communication. Lack of support or inequitable access to professional development opportunities. And that's true for students, staff, and faculty. Difficulties in achieving balance between work and family or personal life. Are the demands so onerous in your lab or in your work situation that people can't have a reasonable personal life? Are illegal behaviors evidence by way of demeaning, sexualizing, hostile or condescending language? Is that type of language tolerated in your department? And then certainly the geosciences have a major challenge, as we all know, about retention and tenure of women and also minority faculty, staff, and students. So are you doing everything you can to increase diversity in your department? Well, instability takes a toll, and it leads to negative effects in job satisfaction, to a sense of belonging, and uncivil workplace experiences were also associated with greater psychological distress, sometimes physical disorders, and so on. So what can we do to increase civility? Well, I love this slide, and this is from Riley and others from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They advocate that we all engage conscious acts of inclusion. Wouldn't that be a great thing every day to show up to work and commit one conscious act of inclusion? Say hello to people that you don't often see or that you don't often interact with. Make sure you ask how their weekend went. How did that field trip go? Have a conversation with someone who's different. In our department, one of our young faculty members has started Friday lunch, and everybody is encouraged to bring a brown bag and just sit and chat and say, how's it going? Stop supporting excluding behavior. Don't laugh at jokes directed at people or that can be offensive, and so on. But I just love this concept of creating conscious acts of inclusion on a daily basis. There are many, many climate surveys out there. This one is from the National Center for Professional Research Ethics. I really recommend that you download this or use a similar one and pass it out to students and staff and faculty. And you may be surprised, hopefully in a pleasant way, but there may be some deep-seated feelings that haven't surfaced. You might be surprised at the number of warning signs, or perhaps even in the red zone, dangerous or toxic types of situations that you may not be aware of. Anyway, so I highly recommend a climate survey. Have you prepared a department vision and inclusiveness statement? Here's one from Virginia Tech. It's just one of many. Boise State has one posted. Colorado State has one posted. And this is something that should be on your webpage and on brochures and in your student guidelines, affirming that all people are welcome in this department. This is what Virginia Tech says. We strive to act with integrity in research, teaching, and service, to mentor our students for current and future success, treat our stakeholders and each others with collegiality and mutual respect. There's respect again. Create an inclusive, diverse, and welcoming environment for all, and embody the motto of Virginia Tech, that I may serve through effective outreach and service. And I think that each of us could take just a small step and make sure that a statement of inclusivity is part of your representation of your department to the world. Let's see. So finally, here are some actions you can take today. I would really challenge you to map out and think where these ideas of professionalism are taught across your curriculum. Is it done formally in a class? Is it done informally on field trips or maybe journal clubs or other types of activities? But who has responsibility? And how do we make sure that students really know what's in the GSA or AGI or AGU code of conduct for our profession? Do conduct a departmental climate survey and make sure that faculty, staff, and students participate. Commit to responsible evidence-based practices in teaching. Add an inclusivity statement on your syllabus. State very clearly what the expectations of behavior are going to be in your class. When you write reviews or letters of recommendation, make sure you do this to the highest standards and really try to avoid that implicit bias type of challenge. I know the last NSF panel that I served on did indeed have implicit bias training, so that when we not only read the proposals, but wrote our reviews, they did everything we could to minimize implicit bias in that process. Commit to broadening participation. Make sure that you have a diversity plan for your department and that everyone is indeed supported in your department. Insist on civility in all your department functions. Consider making a departmental value statement. Ethical leadership starts from the top. So particularly those senior faculty members, but all of us really have to model good behavior every day, every way. And then I really encourage you to build relations ahead of time with student services, affirmative action, human resources, campus security, counseling and psychological services. Have those relationships in place so that if a situation does arise, if a student's in trouble or even jeopardized in some serious way, that you know how you're going to act, who you're going to call, what steps you are going to take, what you're allowed to take, what you're required to take. And be proactive and put these policies and procedures in place now. So finally, there's my bruised knuckles after beating on Archie and Nices. These are some hard-learned advice from experience. It's best to be proactive and be prepared. Look for the warning signs and intervene early. Have an incident plan in place. Know the policies. What are you going to do? Who do you report to? Again, the chain of communications. Build these relationships. Protecting personal safety does indeed have to be your highest priority, but also be aware of issues related to privacy and confidentiality. Ensure your department is safe and inclusive, and an ounce of prevention is always the best policy. And I'll just end by saying everyone has a right to a safe, inclusive, and supportive work environment. And I really encourage all of you to think in your own situation, in your own lives, what can you do today to go back to your department and make sure that this does indeed become a reality. So I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing the screen and go back to Mitch. And I'll take any questions.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, we've got plenty of time for some questions, so feel free to enter those into the chat. To start off, we have one from a little bit earlier. Mark asks, how does one document bullying? I think defining it is difficult at best, similar to a definition from the Mies Commission. I'll know it when I see it.
Yeah, that's really a great question. You know, when I was department head, I had to ask my receptionist in the department and actually one or two faculty members down the hall, literally to keep a diary of the number of times that they had received threatening emails. And so there you've got a date stamp and a record, but also interpersonal reactions when somebody stormed into the office and started yelling at a receptionist that frankly was making minimum wage and it wasn't her job to suffer that abuse. And I just asked her to keep a daily log just because she was subjected to a hostile work environment where she was not able to do her job. On some of the, I have a full webpage on bullying. There are a number of definitions and warning indicators put out by the EEOC and in a number of other groups. But I would say that would be, you know, kind of my line in the sand. If you're creating an environment where someone cannot do their work because they're physically or mentally, psychologically threatened, that's bullying. And you know, one time you might pass, but when it becomes a pattern, that's when you need to have people start documenting. Also, making sure the lines of communication are open so that students and faculty and staff know that it's okay to come and address these issues with the department head. And if not the department head, maybe the affirmative action officer on campus. So that's what I would do. I'm not sure I'm seeing the chat box here. Yeah, okay, so go ahead, Mitch, what's next?
So Mark asks, how do you suppose you can get buy-in to change from those in the department who are in a clique that does not show respect for other members of the department?
Yes, boy, you're throwing the high hard ones, Mark, thanks for that. You know, again, I'll just go back to when I was head. I simply, I was very direct and very affirmative that said, we are not going to have those comments in a faculty meeting. You know, those were the things that I witnessed, or, you know, those, or if I heard about something that went on at field camp, I would pull that person aside quietly and say, you know, that is simply not acceptable behavior, before I moved it up the chain of command. Ultimately, here on my campus, once a formal complaint was filed by the student, there was follow-up action by the department head and an associate dean, where we did indeed try to follow that ethical behavior decision-making matrix and try to ask questions. What were the circumstances? What were the expectations? Who was involved? And we had a quiet, confidential set of meetings to find out exactly what happened. And then we referred it further up to the dean and the affirmative action officer for further action. I guess all I can say, Mark, is, you know, the empowering bystanders, I think that we just have to do this every day and simply say, this is not what we're doing in this department. I'm not sure what else I can offer, but yeah, it's really a tough one.
The next question comes from Eric. Where is professionalism taught in your department's curriculum? I think this is great to be thinking about. I'm wondering if you can offer some examples from experience.
Yeah, and I have to say that this is new to me too. You know, maybe only for the last 2 or 3 years. There's a couple of things. We do indeed have an Earth Science Club, and we've had a number of our alumni and people from business come in and talk to the group informally. So that would be part of the co-curriculum, if you will. But we did ask them specifically to talk about professional expectations and behaviors and what their experience was out in the world. That's one thing. The other thing is that we've tried to, on the GeoEthics page, we've tried to develop a number of case studies, and I hope to put up more, but we call these the 5-minute challenges. And so it's probably unlikely any of you will have a class on professionalism. You know, we can't take 3 credits out of the curriculum to do that. But I would suggest that in every class, just for 5 minutes a week, you could ask the question, what does it mean? What does it, what would you do in this situation? And we have a number of, you know, 1-paragraph vignettes where you say, oh, okay, this woman was asked to report averages rather than day-to-day data for a toxic material in groundwater. If you report the averages, it doesn't look like you have a problem, but if you report the spikes, well, maybe EPA's got to come in. That's just by way of an example, but the idea would be to introduce these in small ways so that you practice it in small doses in many classes as you go through. In mineralogy, which I teach, you know, we take on the Libya asbestos case, and as we're studying amphiboles, and we try to wrap those types of ethical questions into you know, day-to-day material that we'd be covering in the class anyway. So that would be my best suggestion, is 5-minute challenges introduced in most classes just to show that collectively we care about these things.
We had a question about your website on bullying. I put a link into the chat to your GeoEthics website, but maybe you could spend a minute or two talking about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the structure of the website is GeoEthics is the top part, and then I've got a lower level page on professionalism, and then below that is another level, a whole page on sexual harassment and another one on bullying. What I tried to do on that website is start with the legal definitions of bullying and creating a hostile work environment, and those are largely on a federal level, and then look at some of the causes and some of the consequences, and then ultimately some of the strategies to not only recognize it, but be able to do something about this. I don't know what else I can say. I'll be happy to follow up if anybody wants to send me a note afterwards if you have questions about what's up there. So what do we have next, Mitch?
That is, at the moment, we don't have any more questions, although I'll add that if you have any more, you can feel free to enter them into the chat. And maybe while we wait, I'll do my final slides, so then we'll come back to it.
Can I just make one other comment?
Go ahead.
I'm trying to report these matters from someone that was a department head that had to deal with a couple of really egregious sets of bad behavior. And I just want to let you know that it takes a terrible toll on a department and on individuals. And you may think it's painful to step up and intervene in any of these situations. It's even worse having to deal with years of fallout from events and their consequences. So this is the point where I always lose it. All I can say is I'm here hoping that I can help you recognize these types of things before they happen, to deal with them as they emerge, and hopefully not have to deal with some really difficult final solutions at the end. So please be preventive and proactive. So there, I'll pass it back to you now, Mitch.
Thanks very much, Dave. We're getting a bunch of thank yous coming in through the chat as well. Thank you to everyone for attending today. I just want to add a few more things before we all take off. I have added a couple links to the screen and a couple of things in the chat box. Other opportunities you can learn more about this topic and others. You can consider your department or course for NEGD's Traveling Workshops program. You can join us at the 2019 Earth Educators Rendezvous this year in Nashville, Tennessee. We also invite you to participate in a community discussion based on today's webinar topic, and you can find that link on the slide and in the chat box. And finally, we always appreciate your feedback and ideas. And if you wouldn't mind filling out our webinar evaluation, we would certainly appreciate that. And if you are in fact interested in giving a webinar at any point, please don't hesitate to reach out. So thank you all again for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at the next Integrate webinar. And thank you again, Dave.
Okay, thanks everyone. Go out into the world and do good. And Mitch, do we need a debrief or are we good to go?